Hey everybody, it's Friday, it's Offbeat, and so this week I'm going to do something a little bit more offbeat than usual. I have another in my series of author interviews. In this case, I'm talking to David Ricciardi, who has just published his fourth book in a series about a character named Jake Keller. These are thrillers. They're terrific. The new one is called Shadow Target. As I say, it's the fourth. The first one was Warning Light. The second one was Rogue Strike. The third one, Black Flag. And these are highly entertaining roller coaster ride type thrillers. I've had a lot of fun reading them, and I had a lot of fun talking to David Ricciardi as we talked a little bit about the process, where he starts when he starts to come up with thriller ideas. We even talk a little bit about leadership and some of the lessons of leadership that he's learned in his life that he applies to the book, and that I think actually have some application to the retail business as well. So the book again is Shadow Target by David Ricciardi. I hope you enjoy our conversation. So David Ricciardi, welcome to Morning Newsbeat.
Hey, Kevin, thanks. Appreciate you having me on.
So the first question I have to ask you is, in your bio provided to me by your publisher, one of the things they say is David Ricciardi incorporates many personal experiences into his novels. And since my first reaction is, holy crap, somebody's always trying to kill Jake Keller. So what exactly did you do before you became an author?
That's funny. I would say it's mostly my hobbies, and I tend to be a bit of an adrenaline junkie. And, I like to do things that involve a certain amount of risk. I derive more pleasure out of something, well done when it's a little challenging. So, some of the backpacking adventures and some of the shooting sports and the sailing trips and things like that I've done, those kind of get me going. So that's really the fun part of it.
So you're avoiding the question I'm really asking is, were you a national security guy before you became an author?
No, I was not. Sorry.
That's right. Because the other thing that's in your bio that I found fascinating, and sometimes bios are boring, but yours just gives just enough information to get me interested. I love this description. It says he once woke up for a 2 a.m. watch aboard a sailboat, only to discover it was headed the wrong way through the Atlantic sea lanes in heavy weather, with one of the crew suffering from hypothermia. Okay, there's got to be a longer story there.
Yeah, so I was helping a friend bring a boat home that he had just bought down in Annapolis, Maryland, and we live up in Connecticut. And we sailed it straight through the night. I think it was 52 hours nonstop. And we had two watches. So the guy who bought the boat was running one of the watches. I was running the other one. And he woke me up at 2 a.m. because it was my turn to take over. And I came up, and it took a few minutes for my eyes to adjust to everything. And it was rough. And we were out in the Atlantic. And I looked down at the chart plotter, and I'm like, what are we doing over here? And we had been passing ships for the past day, the 900,000 footer chemical tankers, all sorts of cargo, container ships and things like that.
How big is your sailboat? How big is
We're in a 43 footer. It's a decent sized boat, but they wouldn't even notice it if they hit us. Some of these container ships, they're moving 20, 25 knots. And literally, they wouldn't even notice. So, it would be like, running over a seam in a road. But so he's like, well, yeah, Doug's got hypothermia, and I was afraid to jibe the boat in the rough weather. And we were pitching and rolling pretty good. So I'm like, well, why didn't you wake me up 4 hours ago? And we could have done this together. So we got the guy with hypothermia down below, started to, get him warmed up, put him in a sleeping bag. And then the rest of us got the boat turned around and off to where we were supposed to be, but it was not a smart move.
How far off course were you?
We were about 12 miles off.
Well, that's not, 12 miles isn't so bad. I didn't realize.
Oh, no. It was just, it put us in the sea lanes going the opposite direction. So, there's like a highway, there's a divider down the middle, basically, which is, I don't want to call it a no man's zone, but basically there's sort of a divider down the middle. And you got the northbound traffic on one side, the southbound traffic on the other. And we were heading north in the southbound lane. So think about driving down I-95, major highway by your house, going the wrong way. And that's pretty much what we were doing.
Yeah. I've had friends who have done the Bermuda race. and they said that can be, I mean, between weather and it's just it can be incredibly fun, punctuated by moments of absolute terror. So I read Shadow Target, the new book first. I'll hold it up and I'll make sure I put a link on Morning Newsbeat so everybody.
Nice, thank you.
Important to do that. And then I went back to read Warning Light and Rogue Strike, and I'm working my way through Black Flag. Now, a spoiler alert for people who have not read all the books. Your hero, Jake Keller, is not Jake Keller in the first book. So he hasn't done the name, and stuff happens, but I don't think I'm giving anything terrible away.
Not too much.
Did you know that from the very beginning that your hero, your protagonist, was going to go through a name change? Because as I'm reading along, I'm thinking, well, that would be like if Ian Fleming named James Bond George Smith in Casino Royale and then changed his name for the second book.
Yeah,
because that's kind of ballsy to change your hero's identity at some right in the middle.
Yeah, that wasn't really the plan going forward when I started writing the book. And when I got to the end, I sort of, I thought, gee, so many awful things have happened. It would be really tough for this individual to continue on, given all the things that happened in the first book under his own name. So I changed the name. And I actually thought I was going to get a little pushback from my publisher for all the reasons you mentioned. And they didn't have any issues with it. So, like it says on the front of every book, a Jake Keller thriller. So even on the front of the Warning Light paperback, it says it now.
Okay, yeah.
You're not giving anything away by talking about that.
How is COVID? I'm curious, and I've talked to a lot of authors over the past year and a half. How has COVID changed sort of your process, your research? Is it going to change your plots, your characters? I mean, are you integrating this thing that's changed the world in the last 18 months into your books?
No, honestly, you never know what happened. For a couple of reasons. One, I don't want to date the books necessarily. There are great books I've read before where somebody puts a hot new piece of technology in there, like a Motorola StarTAC, and I'll read that book 20 years later. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was like, it yanks me out of the present and it puts me in it. And COVID comes with so many, a lot of people have very different emotions about it, went through very different things. And, putting it into the book really wasn't anything, or any future books really wasn't anything I felt like I wanted to do. It's not what I'm writing about. I'm writing thrillers. And, you put COVID in there and you're sort of dredging up a whole bunch of different experiences for different people. And I want to keep them head down, reading the book and off on that little vacation. That's how I like to think of books. I think of them as little vacations.
That's absolutely true. I think it's Patriot Games. Tom Clancy does about 3 pages on this Apple laptop that Jack Ryan is carrying, which is totally revolutionary. And to anybody who picks up the book now, they go, really?
Yeah.
Right?
And Tom is actually the one who referred to the StarTAC. Now, to be fair, he was my favorite author of all time, and I still think he's probably the greatest thriller writer ever. But yeah, he really got off on the technology, and he used to put hot little pieces of consumer technology in his books, and that evolves quickly.
How about, did it affect your process though? In terms of research? I don't know if you're the kind of person who would go to places to get a sense of it, do that.
So Shadow Target is an interesting book in that, so I do go, and I've been off to the Middle East doing research. I visited, so I didn't go to Africa for the second book because Somalia, really not a safe place for people to visit. But I've tried to visit everywhere I've written about. And Shadow Target, I actually had done the research before COVID hit. I think my last trip was in January 2020. So I had it all done, fortunately, and was able to just incorporate all my experiences into the book without really having to do much more. I mean, and everybody, every author uses Google just like everybody else does to find out information. But fortunately, I had the actual, boots on the ground research done before the pandemic shut a lot of things down.
One of the things, again, from when you started the newest book and to kind of work your way through, it struck me as that one of the things, and tell me if you think this is fair or not, is that you seem to have a healthy skepticism, let's say, about authority. There's a disconnect, and this is, I think, particularly, I think, might be interesting to the Morning Newsbeat audience, because it's something we talk a lot about here on Morning Newsbeat, is that there's the people at the top, the people who are supposedly the leaders, often are not connected to what's going on the front lines, right? The guy out in the field, they're more worried about, there's a character there that's always telling Jake Keller, well, you're supposed to check in every 2 hours or something. And Jake's like, well, I was a little busy doing my job, but I wanted you to. And so they're focused on process and often their own careers and the wrong priorities. And I'm wondering if that is something that, if you think that's a fair reading of it, and does that come from some from some sort of deep-seated skepticism about leadership and management on your part?
I wouldn't say it. I have a healthy skepticism about pretty much everything. I wouldn't go so far as saying I'm cynical, but I tend to be really analytical about a lot of stuff. So, in terms of leadership, there are absolutely instances where you've got individuals back at headquarters who are, whatever the industry might be, who are detached from what's going on in the field and not listening to the folks who are actually doing the work. Sometimes they get promoted because they happen to be really good at their job, but they're terrible leaders. Or sometimes they get promoted because they're good at managing up. There's definitely that theme running through the books where Jake and his immediate supervisor have this battle where there are very clearly two different opinions on how things should be done. And sometimes what actually gets done is in violation of what management wants. And sometimes, it's dictated and threatened from the top down. So there's definitely a healthy challenge that goes both ways, up and down in the books.
Although, to be fair, and I'm just trying to think about it as you say it, Jake is usually the one who's right. I mean, it's not, sometimes he gets overruled, but usually his sense of the mission is always right. And it was funny, as I was reading the books, one of the things that struck me, because again, I was thinking about this whole disconnect between management / leadership and people on the front lines, is you're either, and it's funny, you just said you're not, so it's sort of, that sort of answers the question already, but you're either deeply cynical or incredibly optimistic, because it struck me, because there is this sense of the guy who's on the front lines, because he's right, he is your protagonist, he usually does win. His sense of ethics, morality tend to win the day, as opposed to a concern about politics and and roles and things like that.
Yeah, so it gets back to the two different roles that the leader and the field guy, the hero, have, and the leader, his boss, is looking at the big picture. He's managing a lot of different pieces that all have to function together for the whole enterprise to work. Whereas Jake's looking at it from his perspective, and the two of them have a pretty healthy debate and dialogue about it, in terms of, can you achieve the broader goal if the individual doesn't do what the individual is supposed to do? Jake, it tortures him throughout the books, because sometimes he feels like what's distasteful on a personal level is necessary on a strategic level. It's definitely an ongoing conflict and a theme throughout the books.
Yeah. One of the worst questions, or most boring questions that people like me can ask people like you, is, where do you get your plots or your ideas? So I don't want to ask it that way. I want to try and ask it in a way that's a little bit different, which is to say, what do you start with? I mean, each of your books has taken place largely in a different geopolitical environment. They largely take place in different places as well. Although Shadow Target revisits some stuff that's happened earlier, and I want to ask you about that too. Do you start with place? Do you start with the conflict? I mean, how do you come at the books in terms of figuring out where you're going to start?
I would say the theme is probably, the first thing I start with, like what's the root of what's going on here. For example, in Shadow Target, sort of that battle between, somebody's trying to kill Jake and he doesn't know who, and he doesn't know why. And it builds out from there in terms of like, well, what would be a good way to illustrate this? And the book, it's not giving anything away, but the book starts off, you can see it on the cover, book starts off with a plane crash. And so the struggle was defined first. And you probably noticed it in the other two books you read, in Warning Light and in Rogue Strike, where Jake tends to start off, if not immediately in the beginning, but within the first few chapters, sort of on his back foot, and things are going wrong for him. And he's got to dig his way out of the hole. And that's really how I build it out from there. I literally think about it like a roller coaster, where you've got, and for me, it starts off going down, and then it starts to build back up a little bit, and you get all those peaks and valleys that make it fun to read.
And Shadow Target is different in the sense that, at least of the three, it's the one where Jake doesn't really know what's going on. In the other books that I've read, he knows who's trying to kill him, right? And it's a question of for the most part, and it's largely a matter of evasion. How do I evade them and complete my mission?
Yeah, he's on a mission for the first three books. Like he has got an objective in mind. He is pushing forward. He is trying to accomplish something. In the fourth book, starts off with him on vacation and somebody's trying to kill him, and he's trying to figure out what's going on.
Right. Was that as a writer, did you kind of make the conscious decision going in that I want to change the way we come out it, as opposed to putting him out on a mission? Was it a conscious sort of like, I want to challenge myself?
It was definitely a little bit different, but he still starts off on his back foot, which is sort of the way I like to start the books. It just happens that he's not on a mission, and he's, there's a couple common themes in the book. There's one, like assumptions, and I would say ambiguity. And there's a lot of ambiguity in what he's trying to deal with. And he's not sure, like we talked about before, he's not sure who's trying to kill him, why they're trying to kill him, who he can trust. There might be a traitor in CIA. He's not sure. It just seems like the enemy has too good information on him. And there's a lot of assumptions in the book that as a reader you make, and you're like, oh, I thought it was going to be X, or I didn't expect it when this happened. Because, as a writer, I like to lead you down those, and it's easy to make certain assumptions because that's what everybody does. And so I thought that was sort of the way I changed it in the execution of this book.
Were you again, and in this book, you're bringing back some characters that we visited early. And one of the things that always strikes me is interesting about series books, and I love series of novels. I mean, it's like binge watching, although it takes longer. But it strikes me that one of the things that happens often, and I think you do this too, and I really like it, is this character who starts off as being sort of a solitary, hero. There is a sense in the books that he develops something more of a sense of family, in the sense that there are people he grows to depend on, people he misses when he doesn't. Is that where does that come from?
So that's definitely like I would say I share a lot of qualities with my hero, but probably more of his shortcomings than his qualities. But so I'm a pretty independent person. I'm pretty decisive. I tend to move pretty quickly, very self-reliant. And as the books progressed, I had that sort of those character traits for Jake, and I find that redeeming in a hero. But for me too, like I have a family, and I love spending time with my family, and what makes me happiest in life. But I started to incorporate, the like friends and family, because Jake, when we talked about before, when he had to change his identity, he lost all of that. He lost his family. He lost all of his friends. So he was really isolated. Like at 28 years old, he lost everything that was important to him. And, starting off like that in a job that you can't really tell people about is a really lonely place to be. So over the course of the next few books, he made an ally here, or he lost somebody here, or a love, or whatever it may be. And then in this fourth book, it's an opportunity for him to reach back out, reconnect, and trust people. He's not a trusting guy because of the environment in which he operates. And here's a place where he's had to trust people. He's had to put himself out there, make himself a little vulnerable, and see how it works out.
It's also interesting because makes the transition from being an analyst to being an operative. And he's not just, to use the Ian Fleming phrase, not just a blunt instrument. He thinks, and I mean that's what some of the most interesting stuff in the books is. He actually thinks about what he's supposed to do. He applies. He questions more than other characters in the books do, simply because that's sort of his training. So to me that's fascinating, and I don't know if that's makes him an outlier if he were in the real national security business. But the idea of thinking it through, what's the right thing to do? What should I do? I think those are the really interesting questions.
Yeah, no, he's definitely maintained that analytic framework throughout the books, and it's definitely a hallmark of his character. It causes him no small measure of angst too. Like if point and shoot is super simple, but when there's a moral gray area or there are potential, collateral damage involved, he stops and thinks about it, and he feels it.
So lots of writers like to write the books they would like to read. So who do you like to read? What are you reading now?
Right now, I'm actually, a Mark Cameron phase right now. M-A-R-C Cameron, C-A-M-E-R-O-N.
I don't know that right. Okay.
He's great. And I recently discovered him too. Find him highly entertaining. He's an ex-U.S. Marshal who lives up in Alaska. That's him personally, and that's his character too. He has a character who follows in his shoes pretty closely. Okay. Very entertaining.
Okay, sounds sort of like a C.J. Box, Joe Pickett kind of character.
Yep. This guy's name is Arliss Cutter, and instead of being in Wyoming, he's up in Alaska. So super entertaining. Pardon?
Who else do you like to read?
I mean, so I've never been a real big crime fiction fan, but Michael Connelly, I mean, I just don't think he's written a bad book. He's the best, and and the Bosch series on him is just amazing.
Counting the days until like it's the last season.
Is it going to be the last one?
The last season starts in a week. I think it's a week from Friday.
Oh, it breaks my heart. Yeah, whoever did the casting for Bosch should just be put up on a pedestal and idolized. It's such a good show.
Is there a movie or a TV series for in the works for Jake Keller? Because it strikes me as being really perfect.
So I've had a couple inquiries on the movie rights. So far, nobody's bit, but we'll see. Yeah, I agree, and a lot of people tell me that. Like when I actually write the books, I think about it. I don't want to say cinematically, but I think about it very visually. I try to employ all the senses, but I also try to keep it like something that I think would, and not for the purposes of turning it into a movie, because I'm writing books because I love books. Right. But that's just how I view things, in my mind as I'm writing.
Yeah. Oh, I think they're really cinematic. I don't think of that as being a negative, because you can see it happening. He's burying himself under sand because he doesn't want anybody to see him. It's very visual. I think it would. And you would think with Amazon and Netflix, well, maybe one of those guys are watching because they have so much of an investment in. They're so hungry for intellectual property
right
now. I mean, I think this would be a great thing. So, what are you working on now? The next.
To tell you the truth, I haven't written a word during COVID.
Really?
It's been such a change for me, and I'm taking a little break. I've been loving it, but I'm going to get back. I have about 5 or 6 ideas that I'm kicking around right now, and I'm going to pick one and start probably in the next couple of weeks. But I'm ready to go.
Well, let's go. Well, I for one can't wait to read it. Again, for the audience, it's called Shadow Target. It's a terrific book, available at booksellers, Amazon, the whole 9 yards. David, I really appreciate you're doing this. I love the books, and I look forward to the next one.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate you having me on the Morning News Beat.
Take care.